Welcome back everyone, my name's Matt, your cybersecurity instructor. I hope you're enjoying these videos so far. Today we're going to start getting into more of the technical stuff. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on the latest course materials. Also, today we're going to be talking about Linux and building out your first home lab, so grab your computer and let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so this is going to be part 3 of Unit 1. Today I'm going to be talking about setting up your home lab and some other stuff here. I'll also be talking about what Linux is, we'll talk about virtual machines, why those will be very important for our course here, and then I'll go into Mac and Windows briefly, and then we'll get into installing your first home lab. If you haven't done this before, you're going to want to follow along, so make sure to get your computer and then install the programs and follow along with me. So what exactly is Linux? So just like Windows or Mac OS, depending on what computer you like to use, Linux is just an operating system. It allows you as a user to interact with your computer, your actual hardware. Without the operating system, the computer is just a piece of metal with parts in it. So the operating system allows us to install programs, delete things, create files, transfer things to other people, connect to the internet. Lots of great things about the operating systems. So Linux is a different operating system than Windows. We'll get into the differences and stuff, but for now, we just need to know it's a different operating system, and we'll get into the differences later. So why should we learn Linux if we already are comfortable with other operating systems, maybe Mac OS or Windows? So some of these are overgeneralizations, but Linux tends to be a very secure operating system out of the box. We can also customize it quite a bit. It's also a lot faster. So Linux uses less resources than other operating systems in general, not a lot of overhead. And then also Linux in general is free to use, depending on what version we're using. It can be very reliable. We don't have to reboot often. We can install things, we can just spin up a server, and assuming everything works out, it's always going to be running. And then Linux also, users generally interact with Linux from the command line. So it's the fastest and one of the most customizable ways to interact with a computer. So if we were to take the top 1 million websites out there, 96% of them would actually be run from a Linux server. So it's very important that we know how to interact with Linux and what the differences are there. Okay, so Linux features, we talked about these. So security is one of those features, and then also the command line here. We'll get into the command line. So now I'm going to talk about the command line pros. What exactly is the command line, and why would we prefer it over the GUI, or graphical user interface? Just for a little background, the graphical user interface is what we're all used to. We can use our mouse to point and click on things, we can drag windows, we've got menus. It's really easy to use. So the command line, it's a text-based input interface, so we type things in to get some sort of result or output. And sometimes it's the only way we can interact with something. And so on Linux, a lot of the time we have to use the terminal. Sometimes it's the fastest way to accomplish a task. And then sometimes it's the most customizable way to do something. So what is the command line? I talked about it briefly, but essentially it's a terminal window where we're using text as our input. It's a text-only window, so there's no place for you to click on buttons, there's no menus. We have to type in things in order to get a result. A mouse is not going to be useful in the terminal. We're giving instructions to the computer through our keyboard in this command line interface. So the command line interface is what you're seeing, and it's an all text display mode, and so it allows you to type in commands, and the computer is going to interpret those commands, and depending on the output, you'll see if it ran successfully or if it didn't run successfully. So what are some things that we can do from the command line? We can open files, we can delete files, we can send people files, we can log into computers remotely, we could actually print stuff, all sorts of things. We just need to know how to access those commands. So we'll get into the command line in depth, a whole lot in different modules, but for now I just want to talk to you about what the command line is. Okay, so now let's talk about Mac versus Windows. Is one better than the other for your host machine? So in general, it doesn't really matter which one you're going to use for now. For the most part, all the security tools out there are built on both platforms now. This wasn't the case about 10 or 15 years ago. So if you have a preference, stick to that operating system and don't go and buy a new computer. As long as your computer has enough resources to, run multiple programs and it doesn't always have the fan on, it doesn't get super hot easily, you should be good. Older computers that are probably, 5 to 10 years old, you might want to consider upgrading to a new computer for our labs and stuff here. Okay, so virtual machines. Let's talk about what virtual machines are. So virtual machines are an emulation of a computer system. Essentially what we can do is run computers on our computer. So it's kind of like Inception. So if you see here on this slide here, I've got a couple different windows, and you'll notice each of those is an operating system. So one of those is a picture of Windows XP, one is running a version of Linux, and both of those computers are actually running on a Windows host machine. So the host machine is your actual computer. It's the one you can touch, it's the one you turn on and off, but we can also install additional virtualized computers on our computer. Why would we want to do this? So instead of going out and buying a new computer for each computer we want to run, we can just put them on our existing hardware and we can save money. So we're using existing hardware to run multiple machines. The only thing is it's not as fast as having a dedicated machine, but when we're practicing, we can use VMs. It's very cheap, it's free, very flexible, and we can actually connect these VMs to each other so we can simulate pen testing or hacking, and it's all on our computer, so we're not affecting anyone outside of our network. Which brings us to sandboxing. So sandboxing is an important concept. Essentially, it allows us to keep everything separate from our real computer or the outside world. So if we want to do something inside one of our virtual machines, it's going to theoretically stay there and not affect our host machine. So let's say your host machine is a Windows 10 computer. You bought it, it's a laptop, you open it up, that's your host machine. If you installed a Linux virtual machine on your host machine, right, anything you do in that Linux machine should not affect your actual host machine. So if we make a mistake on the virtual machine, we can go ahead and just reset it. We can, revert to a previous backup, and I'll get into that later. But always make sure you're making backups of your virtual machines. They have a tendency to become corrupt over time. So let's go ahead and get into the home lab installation here. Okay, so as you can see in my window here, I'm pulling up a browser. You can use whatever browser you like. If you're on Mac, you can use Safari, Firefox, Chrome, doesn't really matter. I'm going to search for a program called VirtualBox. This is a program made by a company called Oracle. This is the software that we're going to be using in order to install virtual machines on our computer. So what you can do is just go ahead and click the latest download button here. Currently at the time of this video, it's 6.1. So you'll click that button and then you'll come here, and I'm running on a Mac. So you would go to OS X hosts. If you're on a Windows machine, you would want to download the Windows host. And if you're using the Linux-based host, you would go ahead and click the Linux distributions. So because I'm running on Mac OS, I'm going to go ahead and click that, and you'll see it is downloading right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on that just to install it. It's going to be very similar for Windows as well. You can go ahead and just hit the executable and then follow the instructions. You might have to run it with admin privileges. Okay, so if you're running on a Mac, it's going to be similar to this. And there are some nuances with Mac that you'll have to keep in mind. With Windows, it should be pretty straightforward. You should be able to install it, reboot your machine, and then come back here. So you're going to see some stuff here. It says this package will run, program to determine if the software can be installed. You're going to continue through the installation. I already have it installed, but you can just keep the defaults. You don't have to change anything. You'll just hit continue, continue, next. Now there might become a point on your Mac where you'll get a screen that says, program not able to be installed, or you'll see something interesting there. Okay, it says installation was successful. A lot of you, if you are installing it for the first time, will not see installation was successful. you will need to come here to Security and Privacy if you are using a Mac and click Allow. Do not forget that step. You can go ahead and click Close, move to Trash, and you can close that. Okay, so we have the program VirtualBox installed now. So what exactly is VirtualBox? So what this is, you're going to see a window similar to this. And on the left side of the menu here, you're going to see a lot of different virtual machines that I have personally installed. These are machines that I could start up, and then I could run a Windows machine, or I could run a Ubuntu machine, which is a version of Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to install your first Linux virtual machine. So go ahead and go to your browser, go to a new tab, and type in Ubuntu download. You should be able to see something here, ubuntu.com. You'll go to download. And feel free to download this latest version. Ubuntu 20 is the latest version of Ubuntu desktop at the time of writing. 18 came out just a little bit ago, and it was updated to 20. Generally, every couple of years, there's a new update. So we're going to go ahead and click download. And you'll notice here at the bottom, it's going to take about 10 minutes to install. So I will go ahead and pause the video here, and then we'll resume once it's done. To machine where the Linux box that we have downloaded has now been downloaded successfully. So in order to import this, we're not going to double click it. There's a special way that we have to run it. So if you open up your VirtualBox machine, make note of where this is. It should just be in your downloads folder. You can drag it to your desktop or whatever you want there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New, and let's go ahead and give it a name. So I'll type Linux machine. And then under Type, you're going to want to do Linux. And this is a Ubuntu machine, so we'll go ahead and do Ubuntu 64-bit. You can go ahead and leave that default. And for now, go ahead and leave that at 1024, should be fine. Create. You can go ahead and leave the default, continue, and then dynamically allocated. Go ahead and do continue. For this, let's go ahead and up that to 20. And let's do create. Before we run this machine that we just created, let's go ahead and change some settings. So you can right click, or you can click once and then go to settings here. And then we want to go to advanced and then do share clipboard. So we can do bidirectional. This will allow us to copy things in and out of the virtual machine. And let's just go through everything else here. Network, everything else should be good. Let's go ahead and do OK. Now when I double click on this now, it's going to try to run the machine. So I get a screen that shows this. You're going to want to click on this little folder icon, and this is where we're going to specify the program or the Linux box that we just downloaded. So we're going to want to go up to this Add button here, and we can go to our downloads. So if we go to Ubuntu, then we can go ahead and click on that and do Open. And let's do this. We'll click on it once. We'll do Choose. And then we can go ahead and start the machine. And as you can see here on my screen, I am running a virtual machine on my host machine. So it's going to be doing some setup. We're going to have to type in some things to get it all set up so we can actually interact with it. But we're installing a new computer. So I'm actually going to minimize this right here for now. So after a while, you should be able to see this install screen. We want to go ahead and select the Install Ubuntu Machine option. Depending on your keyboard layout, you're going to select that. I'm just going to leave it default here. I do continue. And then we're going to do a normal installation. And then let's go ahead and uncheck this for now. We'll do an update later. So once you get to this screen here, you're going to leave that, erase disk, and install Ubuntu. Now remember, we talked about sandboxing, so whatever you do here is not going to happen on your actual computer. When it says erase disk, we're referring to the virtual machine. It's saying wipe it clean and install this Ubuntu machine on it. So I'm going to do install now, and then continue. And then you can go ahead and select your... And then once you get here, you can go ahead and click in and then type in your name. I'll just put this in for now, Cybertrack. And then for the computer's name, this is called the host name. It's not super important, but I'm just going to call this Cybertrack. And let's go ahead and select the password here. And you can go ahead and hit continue. If you wanted to do the updates right now, this would take about 20 minutes to install. We've skipped the updates for now. I'm going to show you how to do that in one of our later modules. But this part should take a while, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then we'll return once it's done. So after that part completes, you're going to see this pop up, and it's going to say you need to restart the virtual machine now. This is not your host machine. Remember, this is the virtual box. So let's go ahead and hit the restart now. So everything that happens in this little box is going to be isolated from our actual computer. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter there. And our Ubuntu machine is going to be booting up for the first time. And I will explain what Ubuntu is later. For now, you just need to know it's a version of Linux. There are several versions of Linux out there. They all have different purposes. Ubuntu is one of the more common versions of Linux. It's probably the easiest to use, very user-friendly, and very useful. Lots of people in the industry use it. It's one of the preferred Linux distributions. So I'll just type in my password here. Then you can go ahead and hit enter, and it'll log you into your Linux machine for the first time. And after we log in, there are a couple things that we want to do, so it's easier to interact with this machine. So you can go ahead and skip this. You can do next, don't send system info, location services, keep it off. And then if you want to update, you can open software now and then go ahead and click update. I'm going to skip that for now. So right now we've got our Linux machine here. On the left there's a lot of programs. I just like to remove those for now. We're not going to use those. Remove from favorites. I'm going to leave the files one. That one is important. There's a program called Terminal that we're going to be using quite a bit. So I'm going to show you how to find that. So you're going to go down to this left icon here that says Show Applications. Go up to Search. You can type in Terminal. And you can click it once. And then on the left here, you'll notice it pops up. You want to right-click that and then do Add to Favorites. So now it's been added to favorites. So this is the command line interface. You can run a sample command to just type in who am I, and this is a command that shows you your current user. So we know it's working. I'm going to go ahead and close that, and let's do remind later. We do want to install these updates. I'm not pushing these off. This is just for the sake of the video. One thing you'll notice is when you try to resize the window, this doesn't change in proportion to the outer window here. We want to change that. So there's something we have to install on this box to make it easier to use. Also, we're going to have to install this so we can copy and paste to and from the machine. So in order to do this, we can go up to the menu option under Devices. Under Windows, you'll see a similar menu option or a similar menu bar. It should be on the top left here. So go to Devices, and there's a button here for Insert Guest Edition CD Image. And then you'll get this pop-up. It'll say, this CD contains software intended to be automatically started. Do you want to run it? We are going to type in run, and you'll type in your password. Essentially, these programs, or what it's installing, it allows us to interact with the virtual machine a little bit easier and makes it more user-friendly, so we can rescale the windows, we can do copy and paste, we can actually share files from our host machine to our virtual machine, and I'll show you that later as well. Okay, so we can go ahead and do return to close the window, and it has now been installed. You'll notice the changes don't take effect here, so we need to actually reboot the machine. There are a couple ways to do this, but I'm going to show you how to do it from the command line. You can type in reboot, or you can actually go up here to power settings and then do power off and reboot. I'm just going to type it in here. So like I was explaining earlier, we can do a lot of things from the command line. These are just some simple commands as well, but we'll get into some more stuff later. So while that's booting up, I'm going to pull up the machine here. So this is one of my virtual machines. This is the one that we created together. If I want to add a shared folder, so let's say in my VirtualBox, I wanted to make a file, and then I wanted to transfer it to my host machine. I'll show you today, but in another module we're going to get into more details about it. So essentially you go into settings, you go to shared folders, and you're going to add a folder here. Now you can select a special folder on your desktop, so let's do new folder, and let's call it VM for virtual machine _ shared. So let's go to other, and then on, let's see, desktop, go to VM shared. And then you're going to want to select auto mount. And what this will do is every time you boot up your VM, it's going to load this. You might have to reboot the virtual machine in order for it to work. So now that the machine has been rebooted, let me show you what I mean by rescaling. So if you do this, the machine resizes so it's easier to use. So if you want to use the entire screen, you can now use the entire screen. You can go full screen, stuff like that. So I'm going to right click on the CD. We don't need it anymore, so let's eject it. Those were the tools we just installed. And then if we reboot again, we can actually share files across here. So for the next module in Unit 2, we're going to be going into the command line, how to interact with Linux, how to create files, delete files, make directories, and then we'll get into scripting in Linux so we can automate some stuff. And then I'm going to go into the security features of Linux. So we'll keep building off of these concepts. These are going to be very important to know. So watch the videos in order, make sure you're catching all of these concepts, and stay tuned, and see you next time.